We have a quorum with Councilmember Zine and myself, Paul Koretz, as chair present. We will ask without objection that item number 2 goes on consent, and I'll begin briefly with item number 1, and then I'll go on to item number 4, which I think most folks are here for. So if we could start with item number 1.
Item number 1 is a memorandum from the mayor relative to the exemption of one Risk Manager 2 position for the Los Angeles Fire Department.
Darren Palacios, Chief Deputy, Admin Operations.
June Gibson with the Fire Department. So this request is in response to a recommendation of the independent assessor that the department hire a risk manager with the appropriate background with the goal of reducing the risk of litigation due to the high payout costs as a result of litigated cases. So the exemption would give the department the flexibility to establish the appropriate requirements in order to meet this need. Our plan is to model the requirements after that of the police department's risk manager who has a legal background. Councilman Zine and his Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee has been monitoring the city's risk management program and has received reports from key departments, including the police department. And I believe that the new risk manager in the police department has conveyed the successes that she has been able to put forth within the department with respect to litigation as well as monitoring internal and external risk exposures. So our goal is to be able to cast a wide net to allow individuals with the appropriate background and experience both within the city as well as outside of the city in order to apply.
So I certainly understand the need, and we have this hit us in the face every meeting of Budget Committee in closed session as we have litigation that we wonder with appropriate risk management, could we avoid repeating the same mistakes? So I understand it. What will they specifically be doing? What are their tasks?
Some of their duties are going to be identifying, analyzing, and measuring potential external and internal risk exposures in the fire department operations, as I indicated, developing policies and procedures to mitigate or eliminate such risks, developing and implementing methods for risk control and loss prevention, evaluating the effectiveness of the implemented measures, developing risk awareness and other appropriate risk management training programs, ensuring compliance with the Mayor's Executive Directive 9, including developing litigation risk management strategies, serving as liaison to the City Attorney's Office and LA Fire Department litigation matters.
Okay, Mr. Zine, any questions?
Hello to you. Mr. Gibson,
Hello, sir.
this you're doing or the fire department's doing?
Excuse me?
This you're doing or the fire department's doing?
It started with the fire department,
And then you took it over.
and now I'm here.
Well, how many risk manager do they plan to have in the fire department? Risk managers, I should say.
Just the one,
One risk manager.
yes.
And who's handling that responsibility now?
Currently, risk management is overseen by a battalion chief, correct? And the fire department is beginning to recognize that firefighters can't do everything. There are certain duties and responsibilities and functions that are better performed by civilians with the appropriate background. And certainly they came to the recognition as a result of the independent assessor's audit, as well as the hearings that you have had in AGE committee, the recognition that this is a responsibility that is better performed by a civilian. It's for that reason the position was requested in this year's budget. And so now we're requesting the exemption so that the appropriate candidates can be considered for hire.
And what's the
The salary, yeah, the salary is comparable. The salary is comparable to a senior management analyst 2, which I think tops off at around 125.
Okay. And that we need to change the culture now and not change it 5 years from now, because the liability costs the taxpayers now. As there was a case today in the council, the police department-related matter, another multi-million-dollar case on risk management. So whoever is selected, there has to be an emphasis. We need to do impact now and not to say, well, 5 years from now we'll reduce this. And most of the situations that we see are internal, meaning they're employee, where you as the gold badge, double silver badge, do something, they don't like it, and then they file a lawsuit, and the city pays millions of dollars. So there's got to be something done, and not something that, well, we'll get it fixed in 5 years. And that's one of the concerns I have with the risk manager and the police department, is that we need to address it now with the cost savings that would go into the services that need to be provided. So,
Well, I get the impression from having conversations with the police department's risk manager that there clearly is a recognition that the improvements need to be effected immediately. And I know that, she's been very active in monitoring the litigation cases that have been pending within the police department, and has been attending the claims board's meetings and monitoring the cases that have been presented there, as well as being a liaison with the city attorney's office to discuss pending cases. So that certainly is the direction that the fire department is planning on going with respect to the risk manager that we're planning on hiring.
and then something that they've dealt, not just an attorney, but that they've dealt in the risk management arena.
Right.
Like when you go to the doctor, you go to the cardiologist versus the other doctor. In other words, somebody that's an expert in that particular field, not just because they are an attorney, but that's a very specialized field. And that's one of the concerns, is that someone who's dealt with that, is aware of what we need to do to change the culture. The fire department's gone through a lot of changes, there's no question. I don't think there's any serious cases, to my knowledge, pending. Whereas we want to make sure that they're up and running and say, this we need to implement so we don't have these situations.
There certainly is not the intention of this position to focus only on litigation. There's the recognition that risk management runs the broad range of issues, workers' compensation, safety, appropriate training. And that is what the intention is that the individual is going to be responsible for the broad range of risk management, in addition to coordinating and contacting the CAO's citywide risk manager. I know that the police department has engaged with the CAO risk manager and meeting with them on at least a quarterly basis. I know that the fire department is planning on doing the same thing. And certainly this individual is going to be directed to be as comprehensive as possible with respect to addressing risk management in the department, and not just limited to litigation.
Okay, and then what kind of staff will this individual have?
Well, the budget included a management analyst, but unfortunately, we had to eliminate that position in order to avoid layoffs, because there were 12 positions that were slated as part of the, I think there was 6 months funding that was approved by council, and then recently, I think, there was still the expectation that departments be able to come up with offsets if we're going to avoid laying individuals off. And so the only way that we could do that was to sweep the vacancies. And so that happened to be one of the vacancies that was swept. So any kind of staff support that's going to be provided to this department, we're going to have to find a way to share some of the responsibilities with existing staff.
Maybe you could help with that.
Maybe I can.
Is that enough questions for her?
Adequate for me.
We miss you at this committee because I know you went over to the fire department and you were always so efficient in answering the questions when you were with the other part of the city. Anything else you want to add?
It's like coming home, coming here today. So
Yes, I bet it is.
Well, welcome home.
thank you.
Anything
And, for-
on that? Anything from you?
No, we were specifically looking at someone with the, obviously, labor relations background, and that was kind of what we talked about, looking for that specialty person that's unique to knowing those problems and having that background, not just a legal degree.
And it'll be an at-will employee, not a civil service position.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And for the record, Councilmember Alarcon has joined us, and if you have any questions.
I was just curious about what are the specific responsibilities that are different than what management is already trained and knowledgeable to do. In other words, the fire chief is not just knowledgeable about fires, they're knowledgeable about management. And every firefighter is a risk manager of some sort. They're risk, they're inclined to assess risk. Every single one of them. They're trained to do that. So what exactly are we trying to prevent that department employees shouldn't already have?
Excuse me.
You don't want to.
I think
He don't want it. He wants you to answer.
I think in response to your question, I think you're right. I think that risk management is the responsibility of every supervisor and every manager, particularly in a public safety assignment such as a firefighter. However, there's the recognition that there is a need for an individual that is able to take the data and to analyze the data and to develop the appropriate training programs and to convey to the staff as well as to the managers where the liabilities are and to establish the appropriate training programs in the field so that the risk exposures can be reduced.
Wasn't that what? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot because I think there's some kind of need here. I'm just trying to draw it out. I don't know what exactly what the gap we're trying to fill is, but wasn't that what we hired the last consultant to do?
I'm not sure what consultant we're talking about.
The one that had to do with the developing the system that was similar to the LAPD?
It was that former LAPD detective.
Who? Are you talking about the independent assessor?
Right. Well, wasn't that what they were supposed to do? Partly. I mean, not completely, but
the independent assessor is responsible for conducting audits of a range of.
no, that's not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking,
Okay.
Former LAPD.
yeah, the LAPD guy who was supposed to develop a model for fire response that was similar to track fire response, similar to what LAPD did.
Are you talking about Jeff Godown?
Go down. That's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Jeff Godown was not hired to address risk management. He was hired to address response time.
But some of the things you described in terms of your description of the responsibilities of this person, you said things like developing training programs. Isn't that what he was doing?
No.
Wasn't he recommending certain training
No,
elements?
his sole responsibility was to analyze response times once a 911 call goes out to a fire station and the length of time that it takes for an engine company to
Okay. And
arrive at the scene.
what happened to the work that he did?
Well, he was only there for a very, very short period of time, and so he left, and what has occurred is that the department has engaged the services of RAND, USC, and other consultants, excuse me, on a pro bono basis to establish a task force. And what resulted in the analysis of the data in the CAD system was a determination that there was a lot of data that skewed the response times. And so we're now developing a different model for evaluating what the appropriate
But that's what we knew
response time
before
would be.
that's what we knew before we hired him.
Excuse me?
That's why we hired him, because we knew that already. And so he didn't get that done.
He was here for a very, very short period of time, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we engaged the other consultants on a pro bono basis, and what the department is.
What are the risks that we are trying to avoid? What exactly is this position going to resolve?
Well, before you arrived, what we indicated was that the impetus for the recommendation for establishing the position was the findings of the independent assessor, that there were high costs in payouts as a result of litigation. And a lot of those payouts are related to labor relations issues, to tell you the truth. And as Chief Palacios indicated, one of the focuses of our recruitment efforts is somebody with a legal background, and preferably somebody with a labor relations background, so that if there are issues that arise that indicate that there are personnel labor relations implications, then he or she would be able to address it up front before it becomes a litigated matter.
Okay, so with the consultant that we hired to track the response time issue, fundamentally there was, at least it was reported in the newspapers, that the department was unwilling to respect this person's judgments. What has changed that is any indication that the department will now respect the next person's judgments?
Are you talking about the risk manager, or are you talking
Yes.
about the response time issue?
The risk manager. I mean, if you're saying that one of the key issues is labor relations, and this person is coming from the outside to impose their judgment on things that need to be changed. The last guy that tried to change things in the department relative to response times, I mean, he was out before we could, before the ink was dry on the contract. I mean, one of the long-standing criticisms of the fire department, criticisms or compliments, depending on how you're looking at it, is that it's an entrenched old boys network. And yet we're seeking to hire somebody from the outside that might run up against the same wall the last guy ran up against.
Well, Jeff Godown was not hired on contract. Jeff Godown was hired on what we call a callback. He is a retired LAPD detective. The charter allows the chief to hire somebody back for up to a year. He came back because he was acting.
I'd like to stop the discussion a little bit far afield from the agendized issue as to the report. This is the report that we're discussing is not an analysis of this particular employee and his relationship with the department. It's really about whether or not we're going to hire this risk manager. So if we could focus the discussion a little bit closer, that would be.
But I'm making a case that of concern that we did not have success in our previous arrangement, and I'm wondering why we expect something to be different in this case when we're bringing in somebody from the outside to analyze the department.
If I can just finish my train of thought about
Actually, if I could
Detective Godown.
follow up on our city attorney's suggestion, I believe what's before us is whether or not there should be a civil service exemption for this position, more than whether it's a good idea or not.
Exactly.
So
Well,
I think we need a clearer connection to.
The clear connection is I'm a councilman who has the right to consider the factors of whether I support the recommendation, and one of the factors that I'm considering is a previous outsider coming into the department that met with some failure, some amount of failure, and why should we believe this is going to be successful? I think that's a fair question for a council member to ask.
Yes, but you have to keep it focused on the agendized item. You're still obligated to stay within the...
I believe I am within that agenda. I don't understand why I'm not.
Well, if we could keep it focused on the issue, which, as Councilmember Koretz points out, has to do with the exemption issue.
I think I am keeping it in that. My decision is whether or not I want to support approving an exemption that is recommended here. And I'm concerned that there was a previous outside person to come into the department that had it was a failure. And I think that's a fair consideration for our city councilman to have. So what is going to make this one different?
Am I allowed?
The exemption is permitted to allow the exemption is to bring in an outside person to evaluate the department and recommend changes, which is essentially what we did with the guy, even though the subject matter was different. And then that person met with, in his words, I'm not concurring, I'm not agreeing with it, but it was very published in public that they were dissatisfied with the department's respect for how he was doing his work. Well, what is going to say the department is going to receive this outside person's work with more, with more success?
Jeff Gonown, and let me start by saying I think
I actually think you should not talk about Jeff Gonown. I'm not asking about him personally. I'm asking about the department's relationship with people coming in from the outside to evaluate them and make recommendations.
Okay.
Now, I'm not. Maybe you shouldn't even talk. I'm wondering why isn't. Maybe the department should say why this person is going to be treated with more respect than was alleged in the previous.
Can I just respond?
Sure.
From the use of the term outsider. I consider myself to be an outsider from the department, given the fact that, and probably compounded by the fact that I came from the CAO and CLA. There frankly is not a lot of trust from certain departments with respect to employees who used to work in the CAO and CLA because we're one of you. So from that perspective, I don't believe that by virtue of the fact that an individual who has not previously worked in the fire department is automatically going to be at a disadvantage working in the fire department. The fact that the department is recognizing that a risk manager, which has traditionally been a responsibility performed by sworn personnel, and they are now recognizing that a civilian with the appropriate background should be recruited and hired in order to perform a specialized job, I think is saying a lot. In the same way that, with respect to what you were commenting on the issue of response time, there is the recognition that the issue of data mining and data analysis, which previously had been performed by sworn, and because of, if you want to call it the failure of that analysis, they now recognize that it's appropriate for us to civilianize the analysis of, to civilianize the analysis of the data should be a civilian position, I think, is also a message that is very positive. So in the same manner that they're recognizing that if you want to call it an outsider, somebody with a legal background, somebody with a labor relations background that has the capability of being able to, if not necessarily specifically on risk management issues, but there's obviously a risk management component with respect to the high cost of litigation.
Okay. Again, I'm not prejudging this. I'm just trying to get to a position where we understand what we're getting into. Typically, in labor relations issues, an outsider coming in is agreed to by both parties. In this case, we're imposing an outsider in the process. In the fire department, you have both management and the line staff that have distinct cultures where they do not necessarily take kindly to things being imposed on them. So I'm just sharing that what I would be very concerned about is that this person is received with respect and dignity. I'm not challenging you too. That was a very good answer, by the way. But I'm letting my colleagues know that just because we hire an outside so-called risk manager, I don't even think it's a risk manager. It's something else that we don't have in our civil service system, but we'll stick it into this category. But the ongoing issue is going to be whether or not this person is going to be respected by line staff and management.
And I think that the message that you're conveying, particularly conveying publicly, is very important to the department, and we appreciate that. And unfortunately, the councilman, Zine, is termed out, and I suspect that he's going to be somewhere else on the third floor in a few months. But I think that the initiative that he had started with respect to the Risk Management Task Force and monitoring the success of the departments within their risk management program hopefully will be continued. And I think that that's probably one of the hallmarks as to whether or not this position is going to be successful and whether or not the department is going to be supportive of the position is the monitoring of the successes that can be conveyed after the position is hired.
Yeah, but my message is mainly for the department. At some point, the department has to embrace newer thinking.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
We have that individual report to the committee, the Personnel Committee, on updates. Would that be appropriate, Madam City Attorney? Well, we could put that in there as a condition to find out if it's running appropriately or not.
That's a good idea.
It's a very good idea. How often do you want to have it?
You're gonna think that July 1st too?
I think what you do is you could do it to Public Safety Committee and the Personnel Committee, and that way, if there are problems and not getting cooperation or getting cooperation, whatever the case may be, and then there's the ability of the council, the committee, to oversee to make sure that it's done properly.
So a joint meeting quarterly,
Quarterly.
biannually?
Quarterly, I think, should
I
work.
think the more positive way to state it would be as a progress report.
Yeah. So I would suggest that we move this item with Mr. Zine's amendment that we have a quarterly progress report from the risk manager and a joint committee of public safety and personnel.
Yeah,
And otherwise, if there's no objections, we will approve the requested exemption with that amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, let's move to item 4, since I think we have a number of people in the audience here for that particular item.
Item number 4 is a report from the city attorney and draft ordinance relative to the amendment of the Spay, Neuter exemptions and breeding provisions requiring the sterilization of impounded, stray, unaltered dogs and cats and related changes to the municipal code.
Thank you, and welcome Brenda, our General Manager for Animal Services. And if there's anyone else at any point that you'd like to call up to help speak to this, let me know as well, please.
Sure, we'll see how tough the questions are.
Okay.
Brenda Barnett, General Manager.
Kimberly Mara from the City Attorney's Office, standing in for Deb LaSalle.
So basically what we were trying to do with this was clean up some of the existing code and tighten up some of the sections just to make it easier for enforcement. We added some due process and the ability to waive the fees in certain circumstances. The big issue for the department is a public safety issue. Dogs running at large, and particularly unspayed and unneutered dogs running at large, create a public safety challenge, whether they're running in front of cars causing auto accidents, whether they're breeding and producing puppies, whether they're getting in dog fights, or whether they're putting people at the risk of bites. What we know is that dogs that are intact are a little bit more dangerous to handle and do create more problems than dogs who are not spayed and neutered. So we tightened up the spay-neuter ordinance so that dogs who are running at large a second time unaltered do get altered.
And the amendments that PA Committee has before it today, I presume track with the requested amendments from the last time we heard this item in August of last year.
They do.
And it's come to my attention that the Animal Services Commission discussed putting a severability clause in this ordinance so that in the case of litigation, that if some part of it is struck, the rest of it remains intact.
That's correct, and that was not put in, and we would ask that whatever the correct process is for adding that be added.
Okay, so at a minimum with that, we'll probably ask that this come back to committee, and we'll see if we pick up any changes in the discussion. Let me see if anything. I have other questions to ask, but I'll ask them after other council members and citizen comments on the item.
Sure.
Mr. Alarcon, any questions, comments?
I just wanted the department to respond to the letter from the Golden Retriever Club. What? Are you familiar with that?
I saw a copy of it. I can't remember exactly which question was theirs.
Well, it was sort of a series of things, and I wasn't clear on which ones.
I can tell you what some of the questions were that came from AKC, and it might be the similar ones. Is that right, John? They objected to the department being able to inspect the premises of anyone who has a breeding permit without a warrant. Mm-hmm. And we have that other places in the code. This was just a reminder. So that's not anything really new. It's several other places in the code and under inspections that we have.
Actually, most of the things that I read here, I thought would be covered under different code sections, and I didn't see how they applied to this particular.
You're right.
But so I was wondering if you could just explain that.
Yeah, so that one, so there are several places in the code where we are allowed to go in and inspect, so that's really not a change, it was more of a reminder. The AKC did object to mandatory sterilization after an animal is impounded a second time. They argue that the impound incidents may take place a long time apart, but the truth is that the owner has an appeal right. They can appeal, and then if they don't like the decision, they can appeal again to the commission.
But are those provisions being amended here? Are those additional things they would like to add to this amendment?
No, Councilman John Chavez with Animal Services. These are their rebuttals to our positions. So
I couldn't understand that the amendments were actually changing that particular.
They aren't. I think there was a lack of clarity on the people who read and wrote the rebuttal, to tell you the truth, because
these are things they would like, but
yes,
they're not being contemplated.
Well, for instance, they don't like the part where if there's let me look at that. If we find an animal out in the street for the second time,
right,
we're asking that animal be sterilized. They are rebutting that, but that is our position. That is our position, Councilman.
Is that an amendment, or is that already?
No, that's new. That's a new proposal.
Yes, it would be amending the current ordinance, but as Brenda was saying, there is a due process involved that I don't think they really took into consideration. We are, any animal that we catch for the second time, and we're recommending that it be spayed or neutered, we're also saying that that person has an opportunity to appeal that particular decision before our board. But that was not reflected in their comments.
Right.
And if I could ask a follow-up on that specific question, how will they be notified, or is there a process to notify them that they have that opportunity? Because anywhere where they have a due process right, most of them on the natural won't ever know about that right. So
No, it does say that once they're notified, that once we have the dog, they're notified, and they have 15 days after they receive the notification to file an appeal. Likewise, once a decision is made and they receive the answer to the decision, they have an additional 15 days to file a second appeal to the commission.
So they'll be notified at every
Yes.
step of
Exactly.
It's
Yes.
codified in our recommendations, yes.
Right.
They also, there's a paragraph about exemptions for guide dogs, police dogs. I thought all that was covered under working dogs.
Exactly. I don't understand their objections to that. Basically, if you have a dog that you're showing an agility or herding, that dog may or may not be altered. So it just seemed like it was some sloppy language, and we were just trying to clean up that language. They still have the exemption if the animal is an AK. Well, that we took out that part. If the animal is an AKC registered dog, then participating in one of those events is an exemption under the current ordinance. So we took
Those
out
are show
that extra
dogs?
language. Pardon me?
Show dogs?
They are still show dogs.
But that's not what this paragraph refers to. It's talking about working dogs.
Well, those are also AKC sanctioned events, herding, agility. They're also AKC events. They're just for different activities other than
Working dogs?
yes.
They're events?
They're sanctioned events where they compete for herding or for agility titles or whatever. They're just not the breed ring. So those dogs are still qualified for
I
exemptions.
don't think that's what they're talking about.
I believe they're referring to dogs that are trained for agility, herding, and things of that nature.
Well, it said training to be guide dogs.
Oh, well, guide dogs for the blind, if you're talking about guide dogs for the blind, those dogs are always altered before they are placed with a service person, with a person to
So
provide
this
service.
says there must be exemptions for canines who are in training to be guide dogs, police dogs, search and rescue dogs, drug dogs, therapy dogs, herding dogs, cadaver dogs, etc.
Councilman, I'm not familiar with that particular letter. I have another one from the AKC.
Okay, are there amendments being contemplated that are related to that concern?
That's not in the ordinance,
No.
says we changed it.
It's not in the ordinance, but was it in the ordinance, or what? I'm trying to get a sense of
That's not,
what is the issue here.
well, where I think we're at a disadvantage because I'm not familiar with that specific language. I believe that the AKC was opposed to the fact that we were not going to exempt dogs that were being trained for agility, herding, and hunting.
Right.
That's the letter that we received. I'm not familiar with that particular one about seeing eye dogs and police dogs.
Yeah, it says the breeder, it starts with the line I read, then it says the breeders and trainers of these dogs follow stringent guidelines and training. The training is very specific. Certain breeds excel in these jobs and society needs those jobs to be done. You cannot simply pluck a dog from the pound and expect him to perform. So I'm not exactly sure what they're...
I don't know what that
We-
means. For years, the San Francisco SPCA plucked dogs from the pound and trained them to be hearing dogs. So I don't know what they're saying.
And would there need to be intact to do that?
No, absolutely not. They don't place these service dogs intact at all.
But are
Now,
there
they do.
Are there reasons to exempt these kinds of working dogs?
Well, if you were guide dogs for the blind, that nonprofit, they do have a large breeding pool of animals rather than pulling them from the shelter. But that's a total different kennel that would fall under a different license. I don't understand why they would be asking that question, to tell you the truth.
It's not germane to this particular change that we have, Councilman.
right.
It's not germane. We're not talking about police dogs. We're not talking about seeing eye dogs.
That's
The only contention that we have or argument we have from them was we are not recommending to exempt dogs that are being trained for agility, for hunting. That's their issue. We have received that in writing, but what's not on the table are the issues that are talked about there, like we're seeing eye dogs and police dogs.
But that is sort of a duplication, because if the dogs are in those classifications, that means they're also registered, so they would have another way to be exempted if the people really wanted them exempted.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Zion, questions or comments?
Well, the second time, we're talking about the second time, which means that the first time it's okay, the second time then it'll be mandatory. I recently found a little poodle wandering around, tried to find the owner, cute little poodle, expensive poodle I assume, and took it to the shelter, and the owner claimed no chip, no tag, no nothing. And, I mean, the person was obviously pleased to get their poodle back, but the fact is, are we requiring them to be chipped? Or is that not part of it? So when these dogs are found, you talk about the second time for the spay or neuter, are they required the first time that they're chipped when they're released? If you're not going to do a spay or neuter the first time, only the second time?
No, I think it specifies that they need to be licensed, so if they have a license tag on, then we know who the dog is.
Right.
The chip is a recommendation.
But oftentimes, the tag falls off.
That's
I
correct.
lose tags all the time. But the chip, and when I took it to a rescue place first to find out if it was chipped, and they said, no, there's no documentation, and then they said, well, there's no tag, there's no nothing. So finally, the owner was reunited with this dog. But the fact of the matter is, if you're talking second time, I understand the sterilization issue, the spay or neuter, but the fact is, why don't we require, if we somehow come in contact with that animal, that there be a mandatory chip? So
It's a good
next time we'll be
recommendation.
able to reunite. Otherwise, if you're talking about a second time,
Right.
and then a third time, there's, and I'm not saying the owner's irresponsible, dogs get out, cats get out, whatever the case may be, but the fact is, I think it's incumbent, if we want to reunite them, then, and if a tragedy occurs, which sometimes happens, at least that chip will let people know, so they don't go wandering around trying to figure this out. So why can't we include that once they come in contact, before they're released, if you want to do the second time for
I like it.
I think that's a good
they
idea.
must have a chip installed.
Yeah, no, I like it, because then we have a proof positive identity, because otherwise the ordinance speaks of animals who are licensed and vaccinated. So this would identify the unlicensed and unvaccinated, perhaps.
Yeah, so I think.
So we should consider, along with severability, adding that
I like it.
as part of the, that's a very logical, good idea. I would agree.
That's my input for today.
Um,
I saw the knots going up. This is good.
Yeah, I think so too. We have a number of speakers, so let's hear from them, and then we can continue. Beginning with Judy Mancuso from Social Compassion and Legislation, and I don't know what else you intend to speak on, but maybe you can speak for part of it on due process.
I will, but let me hit this microchip really quick. I did a bill in Sacramento with Senator Ted Lieu, which was a mandatory microchipping bill, and what it said was all animals leaving a shelter, it would be required, shall leave with a microchip, okay? And because we don't do that. For adopted, the shelter can make it a policy to do it or not, but redeemed is another issue. And the governor, it passed both houses, sweepingly bipartisan support, and the governor vetoed it. And here's his veto message.
What governor are you referring to?
Brown, but you're going to love the veto message. It said, I'm returning this bill not because this isn't good policy. This absolutely should be policy, but the locals can, and should do this. So today, you are recommending to do what the governor instructed in his veto message for this policy. So that's cool.
I didn't even know about that. That was all through my brilliance with the governor's help.
No, it's true. It's very true. I have the veto message, a link to it on my website. So due process. There's due process all over this thing. It says if the animal comes in And, second impoundment, the reason for the second impoundment is because obviously this is an animal that is the targeted animal that keeps getting out and is wandering around in the neighborhood. If the animal comes in and it's licensed, whether it's altered or unaltered, it's abiding by the law, so that's fine. But if it comes in a second time, then you're saying, well, wait a second here. Even if you're licensed, why is your...
I'll ask you to go on a little bit because I've asked you to speak to due process, so please.
Why not, thank you, why not then spay and neuter, since this is the targeted animal that keeps getting out in the neighborhood? Now, if that person says, but it was the gardener that left that gate open, right? They can go to the general manager. This is exactly how it is in Riverside County. This is how it is across the state in different jurisdictions, and they can appeal first to the general manager. If that doesn't, satisfy them, they could take it to the Animal Commission. So there is due process, and you already hear barking dog complaints. You're already doing this due process all over the place. This is just an additional thing, right? So this ordinance now has been around since 2008, and now there's been time to see, how's it working? And there's places that are confusing for staff. There's places that are confusing for the public. This then tightens up those problems, right? And then the second thing that it does that is very good is it allows for waiving fees. Now, this is important because when a person's animal comes into the shelter and all these fees start stacking up on top of it, right? They come to the shelter and they want to get their animal back. But now it costs more than they have for groceries for 2 months. These changes give the department the ability to waive some of those fees, because at the end of the day, it's better for that animal to go home with that person than to sit in your shelter and either have to be adopted out to somebody new or die, right? It's sitting there costing you money to house it, feed it, care for it. So that's a wonderful thing that's put in here. Tightening up sections for better enforcement. There's going to be somebody speaking to that down the road here. Adding the due process, waiving the fees. Oh, and here's another thing that it does that is really
and
wonderful.
I'll have to ask you to wrap
last
up.
thing is that it doesn't behoove you to walk away from your animal. So what it says is that if your animal is in the shelter and you say, I don't want to pay for it, I'm walking away, that you still owe those fees. Because we don't want people abandoning their pets, and it is against the law to abandon your pet. So take it with you, have some kind of payment program, get the department to waive some stuff, but don't abandon your animal. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. This is great work. City attorney, department, everyone involved.
Thank you. The next speaker is Lane Verbeek from the, I'll never pronounce this right, Southern California Burrier des Flandres Club. And you can pronounce that correctly for me.
That's okay. It's the Bouvier de Flanders. It's a Belgian herding dog.
Close, but no cigar. Well, welcome.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. This is my first time. I'll make it quick. So this is new. I do have a couple of questions in regards to when we were talking from Mr. Alarcon about the Golden Retriever Club, about mandatory sterilization for the second impound. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the dog is to remain impounded while this appeal process goes on. That stacks up fees. That's not fair to the animal. It's not fair to the owner. So I wanted to make sure that I was correct on that. There are so many other places that doesn't happen. It always goes back to the animal. You have your appeal or your due process. But I do believe that it's wrong for the county or the city to maintain control or a hold on the animal. The other thing that I had a question about, I agree. I think the first time an animal comes in and is lost, I think it's great that you microchip them. To me, it's far less expensive, and it provides a great retrieval service as opposed to spay-neuter. However, as the AKC has said, if an animal gets out, you've got 4th of July every year. Now, Southern California doesn't have a lot of thunder and lightning storms, but on occasion, So animals do get out, and there is nothing more frightening for a dog owner than to lose an animal. I would be mortified if I couldn't find my animal and found out that I was being fined or my dog had been spayed. My dogs are all microchipped. I am not the average pet owner. I mean, I do herding, agility, carting, Schutzhund, nose work, search and rescue. I know I'm not the average person, but there are lots of pet owners out there that do like to participate in these activities, that are hobbyists, that do get dogs from the shelter or from other breeders and do it for fun. And I do believe that there needs to be a way to register or clarify for those people, because if I came to you and said my dogs are all AKC registered, that's great for me, but what about my neighbor who just has a pet animal who wants to continue doing herding or agility with their animal? Thank you.
Let me ask you one question. On the process, is there any reason why, from your point of view, you would object to the process as it's laid out, which is dog is to get out once, gets to get out again. At the second point, the owner has the opportunity twice to contest that and be heard with specific reasons other than irresponsibility. Is there any reason to think that isn't a good process?
If it clarified that the dog maybe got out within a 6-month or year's period of time, that might indicate a lack of care on the part of the homeowner. But what if a puppy gets out because you're training and slips out of the collar? What if at 3 or 4 years old we have 4th of July or a thunder shower or a storm and the dog gets loose by accident, or a gardener or something like that?
But then you have two hearing processes where you can explain that. Hey, I'm not irresponsible. This happened and that happened. And presumably under that circumstance.
This period. What's in the best interest of the animal? It's not to be in foster care.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that
Thank you
question
so
as we
much
go.
for your time.
Thank you very much. Ed Buck from Southern California. Well, we'll ask for a response once we've had everybody speak. Ed Buck from the Golden Retrievers Rescue.
Southern California Golden Retriever Rescue. Hi, Ed Buck. Ultimately, people are good. They want to do the right thing. And this changes in these regulations help us do the right thing. A great example of that is that when the spay and neuter legislation was passed by this city, oh God, what was it, 1847? Seems like so long ago. When it got passed, between the passage date and the implementation date, people rushed out to do the right thing because they understood that was the law. The spay and neuter vans that had only 30% utilization went up to 100% utilization. Not because it was even against the law yet, but because people are good. They want to do the right thing. And what this ordinance does is it clarifies the rules for everybody. The good people and the good business owners, that are breeders, it clarifies the rules for them and says, here's the parameters and here's the rules to the game. So I urge you to move forward with this because it's good for people, for businesses, and most importantly, for our shelter system.
Thank you. Hayes Lynn from Take Me Home, to be followed by Whitney Smith from the Riva Foundation.
Hi, I'm Hayes Lynn with Take Me Home. Our rescue really knows this ordinance, unfortunately. We've been in a lawsuit for 3.5 years over it. We adopted a dog from the shelter, and it was not medically sound to be spayed yet, so it went to a medical foster. The foster decided she did not want to spay the dog and took off with our dog. We went to, we've been in appeals court. We've won everything. We cannot get our dog back. Once people decide they're not going to be honorable, it's really hard to have due process to get your animal back and to get it spayed. That's all we want to do is to follow the law. Unfortunately, 2 veterinarians wrote fraudulent letters for this woman. They wrote fake medical exemptions, and the city granted it not once but twice. So that's why we do need to have diagnostics, lab work. If you're that sick that you can't be spayed or neutered, you should have seen a vet, and you should have proof of that. Also, the dog was microchipped to our rescue. but nobody scanned the dog. So again, she kept getting medical exemptions from the city. She also claimed that the dog was a service dog. It's our dog, it's not a service dog. It was a deaf white boxer. Then she also went for an agility exemption through the Continental Club. That also is approved right now that we're trying to get rid of. All they require is that you submit a picture of the dog, and then you're approved. You are an agility dog. You can be whatever you want. There's so much fraud going on that our rescue is just trying to do the right thing. We spent $20,000 trying to do the right thing. I beg you to make these changes. There is due process. But yeah, the animal probably should stay in the shelter until it's resolved. Because once it's out there, what's the point? There are good people, but there's also people really trying to skirt this. And the breeding community helped this woman skirt the law. There are vets that are breeder vets. So, thank you.
One question for you. So, do you believe that the changes that are in this proposed ordinance would have avoided the problem that you're going through?
I absolutely do. We actually finally got to see our dog at a vet. We ran blood work. We ran every test. Our dog is totally healthy. So she wouldn't have been able to provide the city with proof because they never ran any tests. And also the vet would be responsible for writing fraudulent letters now with the changes. So hopefully veterinarians would be more honest and not do this. Also for the city saying, yeah, okay, show us your microchip. They would have looked at the microchip and been like, take me homes on here. It's a rescue dog. And then they would have seen it came from the shelter. So we would have been totally not having to do a lawsuit and not having to go through this, and it would prevent other rescues in the future from having to go through this because you could trace the dog back to who is really the owner.
And it sounds like your situation sort of outlines for us some opportunities for best practices.
Absolutely. I commend the city. They listened to what happened to me. A lot of these changes were from our lawsuit. We've lived it. I've been through it for I still don't have the dog. I still, even after appeals court, we won on ownership and we won on spay and neuter in appellate court. They were like shocked that they're having a dog issue there, and we still don't have the dog.
Well,
so we really do need to prevent this from happening.
I'm sorry that you're going through what you're going through, but it's certainly instructive. Mr. Zion?
Have you ever considered filing a theft report with law enforcement?
We did, and the police were great, and the police said, unfortunately with rescues, we have contracts. We had a foster contract, so it made it go into civil court. And so that is, in rescue, you try to do the right thing, you have contracts, but LAPD was so great. And now she basically now has a bench warrant out for her arrest. That's where we've left this. So LAPD's been involved, everyone's been involved, but...
I do work the fugitive detail with LAPD.
Oh, you do?
Maybe able to...
Yeah, she lives right downtown, but, and so, yeah, and I don't know how, she got away with 2 exemptions from the city, and I don't blame the city, but I really think that this would prevent that, because right now she has our dog, it is not spayed, it's totally healthy.
It is chipped to you.
And it's chipped to us.
Hey,
yeah.
Before you leave, let me get your information.
Okay, thank you so much, thank you.
Thank you. Whitney Smith? To be followed by Mary Catalano.
I just wanted to say that I support all the changes that have been proposed. It's kind of a baby steps continually to improve these laws. I wanted to specifically say I really think it's a great idea to increase the denial of breeder permits to people convicted of a 597B neglect instead of just a felony, because there's many, many more cases of neglect than felonies. Obviously, we wouldn't want to give breeder permits to people that have displayed cruelty and has been processed in the courts. As for Hayes' situation, I was familiar with that, and once the people have the dog, it's almost impossible to get them back. So I agree that the dog should not be punished and kept for an inordinate amount of time while it's being resolved. Maybe there could be a speed kind of process where it's accelerated in terms of getting a hearing so the dog does not have to stay there and incur costs and make the dog suffer for having gotten out. Also, the veterinarians having to provide documentation. There's way too much flim-flammery going on there, too. So they should have to provide medical records and all that. Deleting the agility. I also just want to say one thing. The AKC always pops up. They have awesome funding. When we were in Sacramento, they had Lassie running through the halls and everything. I don't think there's one breed breed club for the AKC in the city of Los Angeles that I am aware of. We don't do competitions here, and I would love to know what the membership of the AKC is in general. I don't see why we should have to kowtow to their concerns. We live in LA and we have a lot of concerns here, and these are great changes to the existing ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Catalano, and you're our last speaker.
I am. Oh boy, I better make it good. I'm Mary Catalano, and my hobby is rescuing animals, and I'd like to retire from that hobby, but because of the fact that we have so many unfortunate births of animals here that we can't handle, and animals are being killed, it's really horrible. And any time we can strengthen these laws and make it more difficult, to me, I think breeding is completely evil. When animals are being killed, if you're a breeder, you should have to watch 10 animals be killed before you breed animals, or 20 animals, watch them be killed, and then go ahead with your process, because it's a mathematical issue to me. So I'm very much in favor of any strengthening of any of these spay-neuter laws, especially dogs and cats, which nobody ever mentions because nobody cares about cats. But we have a terrible, terrible issue here in Los Angeles. This is not la AKC land. This is Los Angeles. It has all sorts of different issues, and I really appreciate your taking this on and continuing with your efforts to make it a better place here for us and the animals. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know who to come up to answer this question, but maybe Brenda and Judy could both try to help me think this through. If there's no better way, I won't suggest to change it, but I wonder if there's some way to deal with having an animal in some sort of hold for 45 days.
Well, I think the reason we originally put it in was because it makes the responsibility for compliance to be on the owner instead of the responsibility of enforcement to be on the department.
Now, is there some other way that we could be assured that the owner won't just abscond with the dog and not do what they need to do, but still have some leverage over them, like
Can we microchip the owner?
or put a high bail on the dog to be returned when the dog and the owner come for their hearing?
I'm sorry, I forget the lady's name here, but the easy answer to her issues is that the animal has an intact license to begin with.
Correct.
The law of the land in the state of California, not just in LA, is that we license our pets. Now, you have two ways to go. It's either altered or unaltered. And
they're both licensed.
Right? So you have your state law, you have your city law. So everything that she brought before you is based upon the person already breaking the law. So if in the beginning they abided by the law by having a license, it would be null and void. All the circumstances she brought up would be irrelevant.
But that's not really addressing my concern, which may not be the person as much as the animal. Why should the animal have to be away from their home for 45 days? Is there some other way to deal with it that would still leverage them, but not cause them that difficulty and everyone the expense?
I understand that problem and that concern. I think that's exactly what Hazelyn and her charity faced when they have not been able to get their hands back on that dog to get it spayed. And that's actually the problem. Now, could we put some pressure on the department to shorten the time? Possibly. We have a staffing issue on on keeping our hearings on schedule. We usually do them in the order that they come in. There's already a constraint when we say within 30 days, et cetera.
So what about bail that everyone is cheering back here?
What do we think about that? I don't know, a $500, $1,000 bail?
It doesn't make sense. If somebody is, that wants to keep their animal is so dead set on keeping this animal unaltered, did not do the right thing in the beginning and didn't have a license, then have them step up and throw down a $500, $1,000, microchip the pet and take it home until your hearing comes. Does that make sense, Brenda?
Yes and no. It makes sense for the people who have that kind of money.
You could give an OR release, an order of
But not everyone could do that.
Well, they should have licensed in the beginning. I don't know.
It's an alternative.
That's why
not
we're sitting
restricting
here and
them.
you're
This is-
sitting there. But I think the bigger concern is actually not for the dog or the owner. It's for the other dogs who may be killed as a result of overcrowding. And so I think this is a problem we have to figure out. And so I don't know, $500 is a lower bail, but or a fine if they do not bring the animal back to the appeal hearing or whatever it is.
I mean, I would assume that once we have verification of their address and a copy of their driver's license or their ID or whatever, that we would then be able to find the person again. So that takes some of it out.
Yeah.
It puts more work back on the department, but maybe that's the way it should be.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a bunch of money, we could expedite the appeal process, but we all know that's not the reality right
Correct.
now. But in the meantime, can we leverage the compliance? And
Realistically, who's going to go out to the house to find, I mean, you don't have the resources to do what.
Well, that's the challenge.
you don't have to. You mail it to them.
Right, but they don't pay, then
You
we're
didn't
out
show up to your
collecting.
hearing. You owe X amount of dollars. And
I
it's
think if
gonna
we
be
do
taken
it, we
from
have to
your-
establish at least
yeah.
some sort of minimum bail, so they've paid a fine by not showing up at least.
My recommendation right now is that we move forward with the recommended amendments. As the author of the Spay and Neuter Ordinance, I said from day one that this is not a perfect measure, that this is an issue that requires continuous improvement, and new technology impacts the realities out there that we could take advantage of. For example, someday we're not going to be talking about microchipping for identification, but microchipping for tracking, and so that everybody can know exactly where their dog is when it takes off. So as the technology changes, as time changes, as compliance changes, as our process changes, but I would recommend that's something that you explore, Mr. Chair, the idea of either a small bail or a fine, or maybe we do a test project to see what really inspires compliance.
How about this? Why don't we approve this as already amended with Mr. Zion's suggestion and direction to come back with an ordinance that with an ordinance that does what we ask currently, and also an alternative that we can continue to work on before it comes back.
And continue and add in the severability.
Add in the severability, add in Mr. Zion's amendment, and work with us on an alternative to the 45-day hold on the animal, such as a bail.
Maybe that would be appropriate with the admin citations or something as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's what I thought of too.
That might be an opportunity.
So let's work on that before it comes back.
Work on an amendment before we go to council?
Yes, because this still has to come back to committee first with the changes, so I want it back in committee rather than council. So we'll finalize all this before it gets to council.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Good,
Thank you.
So to clarify, will that be continued?
Yes, this will be continued until all those things come back to us from the city attorney. And item number 2. At 2, yes, we did put it on consent after questions. Item number 3.
Item number 3 are reports from the City Administrative Officer and the Board of Fire Commissioners relative to staffing associated with the acceptance of a Federal Emergency Management Agency grant award to continue the development and maintenance of Fire Department's urban search and rescue response system resources.
I'm Mark Davis with the CAO. Mark Akahoshi, Battalion Chief, LAFD at Disaster Preparedness.
And if you could walk us through the request.
This is the acceptance of the 2012 FEMA
urban search and rescue grant for the fire department in the amount of $1,276,608. But the LAFD is one of 28 departments that have the USAR designation in this country. That's been going on since 1993. There are 3 positions that we're asking to continue. These have been the resos that have been on the books since 2004. It is 2 fire captain 1s and 1 management analyst 2. There are also the sole source contracts that the fire department needs to also do this as part of the $1.2 million. The city does not need to match funds on this, and they do the expenditures, and then they get the reimbursement through FEMA.
So this is entirely funded by the grant. There's no money that the city needs to put up as part of it.
That's correct, and it not only covers the salaries, but it also covers the benefits and the.
Any questions?
These are full-time positions. Do these folks get deployed when they're called up?
Yes, sir. The 2 fire captain 1s and the management analyst is full-time, but when you look at the contractual positions for the California Task Force 1 USAR team, which consists of medical team managers, structural engineers, and K-9, they're civilians, and they are on contract and reimbursed when deployed through FEMA.
But these folks are with it full-time, whether they're deployed or not. They're maintaining it. These 3 positions that are being requested.
Existing personnel?
Correct.
So they're maintaining the strength of that in case something happens. That's their full-time duty.
No, they're responsive.
Yes, it is. Yes,
So their regular assignment is to maintain the equipment, maintain the readiness, those 3 folks, the 2 captains and the manager.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, now there'll be many months, nothing happens. Now, they're fully stocked, they're fully equipped, they're ready to roll. You get them out to the 130 at the Air Force Base. What do they do the rest of the time?
First off, what they do is we have, one of the captains is in charge of the FEMA CATF-1 training officer.
Okay.
And we perform training throughout the year. The other one, the other captain 1 is a log captain, log officer, logistician officer, logistics, and he maintains the equipment throughout the year. And the third person is civilian, the management analyst 2, who monitors our grants for training, spending, the spending of traveling, training, equipment, personnel.
So they're working full-time,
Yes, they
just not responding to some emergency in some part of the world.
Mr. Zine, I'm reading a paragraph here. I think these 2 positions are funded by different funds. This is on page 4, under the 2012 grant agreement, second paragraph. It says that the personnel costs for the department are $491,258. There was a prior agreement, I assume with FEMA, that the department funded, or that funded somehow, I don't know which salary account it goes into, but it funded 2 captain positions. But, so it says, these costs include salaries will be paid directly from LAFD's salary accounts to be reimbursed back into the respective salary accounts from which expenses incurred. In other words, these are already positions that exist, and when they are doing FEMA work under this salary account, they will be billed that way. But otherwise, they're doing work that is a full-time position.
If there's no other questions, move we approve this item. Moved by Councilmember Zion without objection. Item 5, thank you.
Item number 5 is a report from the City Administrative Officer relative to an amendment of the existing personnel services agreement with Amanda Foundation for the provision of mobile spay-neuter services to eliminate the zip code restrictions placed on a donation from the Jason Hubis Eagle Foundation. Heigl.
Give us a brief report on this.
Sure, council members, Janice Chang Yu, Office of the CAO. The Amanda Foundation contract is an existing contract for mobile spay and neuter services provided. It's up to $500,000 a year. And the amendment here is just to allow a $50,000 donation from the Heigl Foundation to specifically work with spay and neuter of pit bulls and pit bull mixes for the Amanda Foundation to take on that task. And it's amending the contract to allow, instead of limited to 2 zip codes for this donation, to all zip codes within the city.
Why the amendment to expand it, and
Why did they not tell the councilman?
how's the money going to be used citywide?
And why did you not tell the councilman of the district?
John Chavez with the Department of Animal Services. The money would be used citywide. The Amanda Foundation does have several parts of the city that they think that there's a lot of pit bulls that could be targeted for sterilization. Apologize, council member, for not telling you about this sooner. It was at the direction of the $50,000 to be expanded citywide, was at the direction of the Heigl Foundation. The executive director's here, if you're interested in hearing from them.
I actually would like to continue this matter because this came to my attention yesterday. What essentially is happening is the Heigl Foundation made a contribution of $50,000 to go into Sylmar and Pacoima to spay and neuter pit bulls, and they are now recommending that money be pulled from my district to be used anywhere in the city of Los Angeles. Now, there may be a citywide need, but I don't like the idea of somebody promising my community services and then reneging on that promise. So I would like to sit down with the Heigl Foundation and the department to try and resolve this because I'm not prepared to support this, and I will be very angry if it passes.
Would you like to hear from them on what their thinking was, or would you rather just continue it and have the conversation?
We don't need to do
I would support the continuation.
That's fine. We'll continue this item to the next council meeting and presume dialogue will take place between now and then. I meant next committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 6.
Item number 6 is a joint report from the City Administrative Officer and the Chief Legislative Analyst relative to the transition of the housing assets and foundations from the former Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles to the Los Angeles Housing Department and related staffing. This was also referred to the Housing Community and Economic Development Committee, and it was heard on December 12th.
Hi, Michael Keck, CLA's office.
Madeline Rackley with the CAO.
As directed by City Council and your committee, the item before you today is a report back from the CLA and CAO on the LAHD Housing Transition Plan relative to the transfer of the housing assets and functions of the former CRA-LA to the city as the Housing Successor Agency. As detailed in Attachment 1 of the report, LAHD indicates the following CRA-LA housing assets and functions to be transferred to the city. 325 residual receipt loans, 173 home ownership loans, 67 housing real estate, 2,826 affordable housing covenants, 26 conduit bonds, 25 unexpended bond proceeds, 5 housing grants, 26 pipeline pre-development projects, and 6 pipeline construction-ready projects.
Council members, in addition to those assets, and to support the transfer of those assets, the Los Angeles Housing Department has requested 16 new positions to perform the anticipated increase in workload related to those assets.
The Housing Department provided position descriptions and organization charts and other information to describe what those employees would be doing once the transition of the CRA assets takes place. After reviewing the request, the CAO and CLA recommend adding 14 new positions to the Housing Department. For the Deputy City Attorney position, we recommend using existing vacancies to fill this position. And the Housing Department also requested adding a city planner position. We found out that the Housing Department says that that position can be delayed for about 6 months. So the CAO and CLA would recommend that we reevaluate that position later and determine at that time whether or not the Planning Department could absorb those responsibilities. So we are recommending then that 15 positions, new positions, be hired at this time. No city planner at this time. The cost to fund those 15 positions for 5 months, let's say that they all get approved by February and they're able to be hired, would be $839,533, including related costs. We had some discussions about how to pay for these positions. Initially, the Housing Department had requested a transfer from the reserve fund of $2.1 million to pay for the additional staff and some contracts related with this request. However, once the assets that Mr. Keck described are transferred to the Housing Department, they will be receiving payments for managing those properties and loans that will actually cover the costs of those new staff and the contracts. But unfortunately, due to the timing of that, they do need some money in advance before those payments start catching up with to the department. So we talked about how to fund these positions with the Housing Department because the reserve fund is really not an option at this time. So the Housing Department proposed that we use the Housing Reduction Revolving Fund temporarily to pay for the positions and some of the contracts until the end of this fiscal year, when we believe that the residual receipts payments will start catching up with the department.
And have we worked with our labor partners on this?
Meaning?
Are the unions on board with this approach?
Two different, there's the city unions and the CRA unions.
Right, both the city internal unions and the CRA unions. Have we worked with them on how we deal with this?
I'm not sure how to answer the question because
Maybe if I could explain
Sure.
my position, because I'm sort of uncomfortable with this because I've been taking the position that the position should have been allocated to the extent possible to former CRA employees. And now we're approving these positions, but I'm assuming they're civil service. The union's not here. The union's not here. I don't know. I haven't talked to them. I don't know what their position is. So I feel kind of awkward.
I can answer part of your question. Of the 15 positions that we are requesting, 8 of them would be exempt. So they would be able to be filled by former CRA employees if they are in fact qualified and the Housing Department chooses to do so. So half of the new positions could be filled by CRA employees.
Any reason why they aren't all exempt?
I don't know, but I can find out and respond back to you.
Good afternoon, council members. Rushmore Cervantes with the Housing Department. The department looked very closely at the positions and functions required for this transition in the various units of the Housing Department now. Many of the functions are similar, so we identified positions that would enable us to bring staff from CRA if they do qualify, but there are certain positions that we felt that we needed to have consistency with existing staff structure that we'd be able to accommodate transfers within the city due to the budgetary shortfall. So it's a best of both worlds. We felt we put forth a plan that will enable us to be able to offer the former CRA staff opportunities where the key expertise would be required, as well as to be able to have continuity for our existing organizations. Now, we'll also point out that the plan, and we worked quite closely with the personnel department relative to how do we address bringing on CRA staff while being also be able to ultimately make them permanent positions, or at least afford them the opportunity to get civil service classifications. What we're going to be doing is requesting exemptions so that we can actually have these employees, if they do decide to come in from the outside, be in that position for the long term and be able to take examinations, civil service examinations, and still be able to retain their pay at a higher level while they work their way through the classifications to the point where they have a civil service classification equal to that of what they're getting paid when they came into the city. And that way it also enables us to be able to have the same like classifications doing like functions, whether it be in portfolio management or occupancy monitoring.
Yeah, it's not entirely clear to me still why the other positions wouldn't be exempt. What would the downside be to exempting all of them?
Well, we just felt that looking at the organizational structure, we felt that there was certainly expertise within the CRA that would be most advantageous for the city in this transition, and there were others, because there are civil service, there are positions that are currently identified within the organizational structure, such as an accountant position. There are examinations, there are lists that are currently open. There are potential cuts in the city budget next fiscal year, so we want to be able to provide that option for not only for transfers within our department, but also within the city as a whole in the event that there are potential layoffs.
Other questions? Mr. Alarcon? Well, I don't know. I have the same discomfort that you have, so I don't know if...
But we tried to have a blended approach to this that would enable the city to be able to offer positions to the former CRA staff, and short of creating a brand new classification or dusting off an old classification, we've gone with this approach that will enable them to be brought in if they so choose to, and then be able to eventually be accreted into, or not necessarily accreted, but be able to promote within civil service classifications.
Let me see if I can understand this different, or from my perspective.
Yes.
Are you saying that there are certain positions, of these positions, there are some of these positions that pertain to housing department functions that a CRA employee might not fully, in other words, they may not understand. These positions are not necessarily stuck into this particular program. They could move throughout the department. People could be transferred from section to section.
The positions that we're making available that are exempt are really somewhat unique to
The exempt
the
positions
housing.
are unique. I'm talking about the other
But I want to say unique to that industry.
Right.
And the CRA staff
Right.
are familiar with the loan portfolio and how to monitor.
But normally, when you hire somebody in a management position in a department, they are not just responsible to know what that particular unit does. They have to know all kinds of stuff about the department.
In some instances, yes.
Well, I'm still lost because I'm surprised the CRA union folks aren't here. Do they know about this?
It's been articulated to them, so they usually they monitor this very closely.
Okay.
If we delayed this for one committee meeting and had this come back with an opportunity for the unions to give us their input, would the delay cause any great problem?
No, it would not, Councilman. And just so you know, this department is working with the Department of Finance right now, going through the meet and confer process, because the final housing asset list has not been approved. So once this committee and ultimately the council and mayor approve these positions, we will begin recruiting, but we will hold off on ultimately appointing until such time that final Department of Finance housing asset list is received. So we
that'll
want to
take
do our
long
due
enough
diligence.
that waiting for one committee meeting.
One committee
shouldn't
would be fine. We can certainly, make sure we reach out to the unions. They've certainly reached out to us in the past. We can have them here, and I believe they'd be supportive of the plan before you.
I think we'll ask to continue this item for that purpose.
Fine.
So, thank you.
Councilmember, can we we just wanted to make a quick amendment to recommendation number 2. Recommendation number 2 references the exemption of the 5 positions. We wanted to remove the phrase from recommendation number 2 and exempt them from civil service provisions. Inasmuch as LHD will request the position exemptions through the mayor's office, there's already a predefined process to request the exemptions, so we felt the need to exclude that from recommendation number 2.
That's fine. Well, we're just continuing the item anyway, but, when you come back, I'm sure that will be pretty non-controversial.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item number 7.
Item number 7 is a report from the city attorney and draft ordinance relative to amending the administrative code regarding the controller's fraud, waste, and abuse unit to require departmental reporting of fraud, waste, and abuse, and employment fraud awareness training. This was also referred to the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee and the Rules, Elections, and Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Audits heard this matter on January 8th.
If you'd like to give us a brief report on this?
Good afternoon, council members. Deputy City Attorney Renee Stottle. Brief summary of the ordinance before you. It's the ordinance amending certain aspects of the fraud, waste, and abuse ordinance, the controller's office. What it does is it strengthens the reporting requirement requiring departments to report fraud, waste, and abuse to the controller's fraud, waste, and abuse unit and to the Ethics Commission within 10 days, as amended by the Audits Committee. It also defines what fraud, waste, and abuse is for the first time. And the other aspect of the ordinance is it requires all full-time employees to receive fraud awareness training at the time they're hired and every 2 years thereafter. The training is intended to be provided by the personnel department, but with the cooperation of the Controller's Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Unit, Ethics Commission, and our office.
Okay, and I understand LAPD was amended out of the ordinance. Why was that?
My understanding is the department, that most of the matters that are reported through the hotline and elsewhere are not criminal in nature, and they thought it would be more efficient for those matters to be referred to them from the Controller's Office or the Ethics Commission or otherwise as needed, as opposed to receiving all reports of everything.
So an effort not to be inundated with a number of things that aren't relevant,
Yes.
as it sounds. I also understand that the Personnel Department has advised that ITA's role is no longer necessary in the process and could be stricken as well from the item. Is that correct?
I'm not aware.
Raylan Napper, Personnel Department. Yes, that's correct, because the Personnel Department already has an online training academy that's up and running, a learning management system that tracks all the learners. ITA helped us when we were going out to bid for this. This is provided by a vendor, so it's more cost effective, and we've got that underway already.
Is it already reflected in the newest ordinance that we're being asked to adopt today?
I don't know that it is, based on the comments from the last committee. But you knew about it.
The ordinance, I don't believe the ordinance needs to be amended because it simply reflects that they're to assist the department, and so if their assistance isn't necessary.
So if they don't assist, it doesn't really matter. Okay. All right. Mr. Zine, any questions?
We reviewed this, discussed this, worked on this in the Audit Government Efficiency Committee, and I think that we have a satisfactory approach to this particular situation of waste, fraud, and abuse, and how it will be done with the cooperation of the Controller's Office, the Ethics Commission, and the issue regarding the police department. There were monthly meetings the police department has with the Controller's Office, the Ethics Office too, Ethics and Controllers. So they already have an ongoing dialogue, and if it rises to a criminal activity, then they can get involved in it. Otherwise, it'd be administrative, and the administrative process through Civil Service Commission for any type of disciplinary action that would take place. So we'd like to move this forward so we can hopefully come up with some guidelines and hold people accountable and responsible on that great category of fraud, waste, and abuse.
I will take that as a motion, and that passes without objection.
Did you have something to say? I guess you did.
I did, thank you. I'm sorry. Heather Holt for the Ethics Commission. We just had one technical suggestion in the Section 5 of the revised ordinance that would amend the governmental ethics ordinance. We would recommend in the proposed subsection A, taking out the words "in an" after the word "complete." The current law reads that all city officials are required to participate in an ethics training. I do think that specifying that they need to complete the training is good, but that also means I think that we can take out the words "in" and "and" so that they're required to complete ethics training. Very technical.
How's that sound?
I don't think it's necessary, so it's up to the committee.
That sounds pretty innocuous. I don't.
We'll have to redo it though. So it won't matter either way then, correct?
Not as a legal matter, no.
So why don't we just ask that you make that change as a minor additional amendment?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we are now adjourned.